Hello, and welcome back to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Thank you again for joining us. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Rhea Moss, Global Head of Workforce and Customer Insights at iCIMS. We're excited to have Rhea with us for a session titled Myth versus Fact. Play along and get the workforce data needed to solve complex TA challenges. Welcome, Rhea, and over to you.
As I said, hi everyone, Rhea Moss. I lead the Insights program at iCIMS. If you're not familiar with iCIMS, we are a talent acquisition software provider. My role, which is really fun, if anyone else here is a data nerd in the audience, is that I get to look at the activity of all of our customers' usage and figure out what's actually happening in hiring and in talent acquisition landscape in general. So that's the QR code if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. I think it pops up again at the end. But nice to meet you all, and thank you for having me. Oh, the music's working. So we like to make these things interactive and fun. As I mentioned, if you want to grab one of these, Paul, I'm making you play too, and I'm going to call out if he gets it wrong over here. We like to turn it into a game. So what we're going to do is play a game we call Myth or Fact. I will read a statement that may sound like a headline you may have read recently or not, about talent acquisition, about people applying for jobs, about what it's like to hire or retain talent right now. You guys will hold up the myth or the fact side. You see there's the teal and the blue. I may call on you. I'm curious why people put their sides up, so have an answer ready. And then we will use the iCIMS data to talk about whether or not it is actually true and what we're seeing inside our customer base. Sound good? Cool. We'll make this one probably the least fun one. I always say I am not an economist. A lot of companies that have someone like me come very economic based. We come from it from a human perspective of just what it feels like to be in the space and trying to hire right now. But I say I always do one economic slide, and then I promise I'm done after that. So the first myth or fact is BLS reports are the easiest way to understand the current labor market each month. I saw a myth come up really fast. Do you want to say why? Yeah, I saw you were the first hand up. You were like, nope. Totally agree with you. So if you couldn't hear, she said it's a screenshot of a moment in time. It's retroactive. My other favorite thing about it, anybody follow this month's BLS report? They actually came back and just changed everything they'd reported all summer long, right? So it's not just that it's retroactive and then subject to change. It is survey based, and it is also based on what people say, not necessarily the truth. And to your point, it is retroactive and it is changed a lot. So I thought I would start high level and talk about sort of a myth, correct? I'd like to talk a little bit about the labor market and what the numbers look like right now. I promise one single slide and we will not talk about it again. Unemployment. I gave a similar talk a few weeks ago in Vegas and we were having a different conversation. We were saying unemployment's coming up and up. It's actually come back down. We're at 4.1%. And while the headlines right now are reading like, this is great news, unemployment is up, the truth is this is still a really, really low number. We've seen extremely low unemployment for the last 3 years consistently, the longest stretch of unemployment being below 4% for a very, very long time. I believe it's since the Vietnam War is the last time we saw unemployment that low. So these headlines of unemployment going up, yes, directionally it's going up, but this is still very, very low. And I hear that a lot because it feels like the headlines are saying, oh, it's great. It's so easy to find talent right now. And then you talk to recruiters and they're like, what? I don't know about that. Here's the other interesting one for anyone from the HR side, the retention rate, quit rate. Everybody's hearing the headlines, right? The Great Resignation is over, right? We saw those numbers that were huge last year and the year before. Quit rate is back to 1.9%. That is pre-pandemic levels. So again, we all want to, in theory, celebrate. But the truth is, before the pandemic, quit rate had gone up steadily for 9 years in a row. So the truth is, while we are seeing it improve and get a little bit better, it is still something that needs to be top of mind from an HR perspective. I don't know any CHRO that's like, I'm really just not worried about resignations anymore at all. This one is the one I think is really interesting. It's not one that's spoken about a lot. It's one that you kind of have to calculate on your own. But the truth is right now there are still more open jobs in the market than unemployed worker. So this notion of the labor market easing, right? Everybody's saying, you know, if you read just sort of the economic side of the newspaper, that we're coming out of it, it's great, it's working. The truth is, if you are a practitioner, you still have more open recs than unemployed worker. What does that mean? It means, going back to the quit rate, that the people who are going and getting jobs right now are our employed workers. So we're just trading talent at this point. We're not necessarily at the place that we're getting sort of more in that pool of people actively out looking than available jobs. So directionally, the economy is getting better for us as employers, but we're still in a place where you see that number when it's more than one, it means we have more supply of jobs than demand of unemployed workers right now. This is where iCIMS comes in. That I told you one slide on economics. This is where we're going to just start talking about actual talent acquisition data. So we track 3 key metrics at iCIMS to talk about what's happening in TA right now. They are the teal line, which are job openings. Companies opening positions. Are they putting them out there? Are they saying we're an outward intention and we want to hire, right? 7% more of them right now than the same time last year. And then applications, right? How many people are coming to your career site, or your recruiter is going and finding them and asking them to apply for those jobs, right? No change whatsoever. So year over year, we now have 7% more open jobs, but the same exact number of applicants. But what's interesting is the hires, and this is really what I'm hearing a lot of recruiters say right now, is I'm opening the jobs and I'm getting the applicants, but maybe it's just not the right one, or they're not willing to leave their job right now. So 4% less hires this time last year than the same time last year. Anybody surprised by this? Does this feel a little more relatable than the last slide? You're like, yeah, like, I get this. It's English, right? Yeah, this is the state of the market as we see it. So this notion of shifting of the power dynamic between the candidate versus the employer, slow changes we're seeing right now, but the truth is not significantly, big shifts from a year or two ago where it was absolutely a candidate's market to be able to say it's absolutely an employer's market right now, kind of holding the same. So we will switch to the next myth or fact. Get your paddle ready. I know we're in New York, so we just did this at HR Tech. We used healthcare. We switched it for New York. We said, we're going to look at financial services. So think the financial services industry. Applicants per opening. So think of that as the talent supply versus demand, the number of people that apply to a job when it's opened for financial services roles have decreased since 2023. Oh, I love ones like this. I've got half and half. I saw a fast myth and a fast fact. A lot of myths in the back. It is a myth. The truth is, across all major industries that we track, they have increased. So you can see our overall applicants per opening. So think of that as I put a job out on my career site. How many people do I expect to apply for it? Is up year over year. It was 27 last year, 31 now. Even healthcare, the numbers are lower. Mind you, if anyone's in the healthcare space, I am not saying it's easy to hire in that space right now, but it's better. They're up from 18 to 22. Retail has moved from 27 to 33. Finance, as we talked about, welcome to New York, right? 38 to 43. Manufacturing, one of the biggest jumps, a 10-point jump from 39 people per open job to 49. And then I will pause here and talk about this last one. We call it tech jobs. We don't look at tech as an industry as a whole. We look at tech as a type of worker. So think about it. If I'm working for a major retailer and you work for a major manufacturer and I'm trying to hire someone who writes Python code, they don't really care what industry we're in, right? They think about the skills. Look at that number. Right now in tech positions, 65 applicants per open jobs for software developers, data scientists, right? Everything we're going to talk about a little bit later when we use those 2 magic letters, AI. Huge amounts of talent out there looking right now. Not saying it's the right talent, but I will say candidates are seeing it as a huge opportunity. They are flocking to those kinds of roles. And it really doesn't matter what industry those roles are in. We're seeing a large year over year increase. All right, next one. This is a fun one and it makes me feel really old at the same time. Almost half of our applicants right now are not old enough to rent a car. So think of that as 25 or younger. Myth or fact? I see some facts. You're not sure? No. I see a fact in the back. All right. It is a fact. This is where it gets interesting. So we were saying there is talent out there. There's more talent looking than last year. But if we go ahead and look at this, 44% of our applicants right now are under the age of 25, right? And then you think about it, so that's Gen Z. We all want to talk about how, millennials changed the workforce. We were having this conversation 15 years ago, right? But Gen Z right now, 18 to 24-year-olds, 44%. Then you take on that next group. So saying groups under 35, 2/3 of the active applicants right now. Anybody surprised? I see some head nods like, yeah, that kind of lines up. I talk with a lot of companies. It's the fun part of my job. And they say, I open jobs for someone with 2 years experience and I've got 90 applicants on the first day. And I go to hire their manager and I'm not getting anybody, right? I always say this is a time right now that we should be attracting Gen Z talent and retaining millennial talent, because the millennials are doing something I personally like to call shelter and job. We're overwhelmed. We're still trying to figure out getting out of the pandemic. Our kids are back on the school buses, right? We are the people that are like, I can't add anything to my plate. The younger talent right now is saying, hey, I'm reading the news, I'm reading the media, there was wage inflation. Maybe I can go get a job somewhere else for more money. Or my other favorite recently, gone are the days where it's, I can't leave my job, I haven't been here for a year or two yet, right? Gen Z doesn't really think about that. And we'll talk a little bit about Gen Z in general and kind of some of their changing expectations as they enter the workforce. But I think this is interesting when I talk to talent acquisition folks and I say, what is your strategy for hiring Gen Z? And they say, oh, we hire them like the rest of our hiring base. And I say, well, do you know they're 2/3 of your job seekers right now? And they're really changing the way that we not only work, but also the way that we have to attract talent. They're an interesting group. I find them fascinating. But I will move a little bit on to the next topic. So we're going to look at, we'll be putting out actually next week. Looking at Amy. Nope. Week after next Monday. We just changed the date. We do a monthly report at iCIMS, and we're going to look at holiday hiring. So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek on some data. We're looking at retail hiring and also transportation and logistics. So the next myth or fact for the game will say consumers will be waiting longer than last year to receive their online purchases this holiday season. I love the mix. We got a lot of facts. We're about 50-50 on a lot of these. We should have kept score. That's a myth according to what we're seeing in our data. So when we look at transportation, so think about those companies that are helping get the things you purchase online to you, those same 3 key metrics that we talk about. What we're seeing here that's really interesting is look at that. The openings are up 2%, right? The applications for those jobs up 35%. People want to work in this space. And the hires are down 17% since the beginning of 2022. It's an interesting one to think about as we say, companies are going ahead and they are opening the jobs. People are applying again. This is a place where, again, we saw a lot of folks say, I'm trying to hire, I can't find somebody. Or anybody in this room have the topic 2 years ago, the conversation of like, I just need somebody with a heartbeat? Right? I mean, like we're all laughing because it's like we went through something collectively together. Like that was a terrifying time where companies were like, I just need a human being. The good news is we are seeing them come back. It's about the same number. If you look, 36% and 35% of applicants year over year, about the same number of hires, but we are seeing more job openings. So the companies are trying to hire for this right now. They are actively out there saying, we've opened the positions, we want to find the talent. What we typically see is that you'll see openings go up. Think about this. Think about the system in your own company. You get the job approved, you open it, then somebody applies, then they get hired, right? So we're hoping to see, if you look at kind of the shape of that teal line, that the openings number will continue to go up, which should help for all of us that do all of our shopping online at 11 p.m. on the couch, right? One more on the myth or fact side that I think is interesting. We're kind of all over talent acquisition and CHROs, but we did a report this year where we surveyed a lot of CHROs, about 1,000 of them, and we asked them, what do you think is changing in talent acquisition? So 1/3 of CHROs think recruiters are evolving into more strategic roles in the business. All right, I see a lot of facts. It's a tricky one, but hold on, because it's way more than 1/3. Does anyone want to take a stab at the number? So we have 2/3. Anybody want to go for like 75%? I got a head nod, no like bidding. Anybody think 80%? No? The truth is it's 90%. 90% of CHROs that we spoke to said they see the role of the recruiter morphing into a strategic talent advisor in the business. But 47% say it's starting to happen now. And the other half say they see it happening in the future. I think this is really fascinating. And I think if we kind of take our talent acquisition hats off for a second and think back in kind of the history of HR, think about 15 or 20 years ago. we didn't even really call them this at the time, but we call them now HRBPs, right? What did HRBPs do 15 or 20 years ago? Anybody remember? They did help hire. Yes, they were the everything. Generalists, right? So it was, I need a change to my benefits. I need someone to schedule an exit interview, right? What are the other fun ones? I'm putting PTO in the system, right? Now what do we see HRBPs doing in companies that are really optimizing their HR function? They're sitting in the business units meetings. They're working with the CTO to say, hey, you're going to build this new product next year. Let's sit down and figure out the teams you need to do it. They have that seat at the table in their business unit. And that's why I said I don't think we called them HRBPs, because they really weren't business partners. What I think we are going to see, and what we're seeing CHROs say, is that that same thing is going to happen in talent acquisition. Who knows the market outside your own company better than the person whose job it is to spend all day talking to people outside your company? And I think as we watch this evolution happen, and it's interesting to watch the dynamic, I will say post-COVID, right? You had this like high of high for recruiters where it was, help, every CEO, what's your number one business problem? I don't know if I can hire the talent I need to deliver the results I need, right? And then we saw, the economy turn a little bit, and it was, relegated a little more to the back seat if they were still in the car from a talent acquisition perspective. But I do think we're starting to see that shift, and CHROs are realizing that the ups and downs and the pendulum swings, hopefully eventually we'll see that talent acquisition and that recruiter become part of the conversation. So it's no longer an order taker. I like to say, if you think of going to a restaurant right now, in a lot of companies, talent acquisition is the person that's behind the curtain that someone walks back and says, this person wants a cheeseburger with cheddar cheese and a side of French fries, and the person just whips up the order and hands it out, right? As opposed to figuring out what's on the menu or helping come up with the idea of the restaurant. And I think that's where we are starting to see a change, and about half of companies are starting to think about it now, and the other half are coming. But I do think, if we talk high-level trends and not the buzzwords, right? Not AI and skills and everything that's on all the conference talks, but I do think we're going to start to see that evolution change. And maybe things like AI and skills will help enable or cause some of the change, but it is coming. All right. Since 2021, I was just talking about this a little bit. Since 2021, there has been a significant decline in the demand for recruiters. I see 3 myths in a row. Do any of you want to say why you think it's a myth? Yeah.
More so like early careers.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of companies are trying to build up that talent pipeline early on, and with the increase in Gen Z and millennial kind of newer professionals coming in, I feel like more and more early career recruitment has increased.
Anybody that said fact want to say why they? Go ahead. You're like, I got my paddle.
Well, I say fact because all of my recruiters are struggling to find work. So
Yeah.
I think that hiring has slowed.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas there was this really push for adding a lot of talent, so
Mm-hmm.
the recruitment staffs were larger, a lot of them got laid off. So hiring isn't at the pace that it was. So I don't think that there's a demand for bringing recruiters on.
I think you make a really good point, and actually, I'm going to go totally off script here. This is the fun part. And if you don't mind sharing, your talent acquisition team in your company today, do you mind, anyone raise your hand if their talent acquisition team is bigger now than it was 2 or 3 years ago? Smaller? Same size? Bigger.
Ours is actually bigger because we used to rely on external recruiters. So
yeah.
we just built an internal team. So that's really the only reason.
Got it. Interesting. This is a fact, actually. And this is one that sometimes when I show it at conferences that are full of recruiters, I have to duck a little in case they throw things at the stage. If we look at, again, those 3 key metrics that we talk about, the number of openings for the job, the number of applicants for the job, and the number of hires for the job. Look at this. We have about half as many openings as we did in December of 2021 for recruiters. We have 17% more people applying, and we have 45% less hires in that space. Right? And what I find really fascinating, and I love that you brought that up about, talent acquisition teams do tend to be one of the first groups to get hit in a RIF. The fact of the matter, right? We're not growing, so we don't need the people who In theory, all they do is help us grow, even though we all know that's not the case. And I think this is really fascinating is then where are all those people going? Shouldn't this be like the tech version of this chart where you've got 200 times more applications if we've got 3x the unemployed recruiters? So where are they going? And I think it's interesting because we saw this giant yo-yo, right? So if you think of COVID, we saw, again, 2020, we saw recruiters first to go, right? We know that all hiring slowed down as companies did their first rifts during COVID. It was the headline news, all the recruiters got let go. But then 2021 and 2022, we were actually quoted in an article. It's my favorite title of an article. I got to remember who wrote this one. Carly probably does. And the title was, "The hardest thing to recruit for is recruiters." And then that's when, if anybody's on, I'm a geriatric millennial. I'm not cool enough. If anyone's on TikTok, I saw like the redo of the TikTok on Facebook. People who were going on, they were saying like, I'm a recruiter at name the Silicon Valley company, and I'm paid $300,000 a year, and I didn't actually fill a role. We all probably saw that, right? Right? But then now we've gone the other way again, where we're not seeing hiring at all in the space. Look at this flat line. Since the end of 2022, just a significant decline whatsoever. What will be interesting is if we see big turnarounds, we see an economic shift, if we see companies that say, hey, wait, we need to hire again, let's see these numbers go way back up. Is it fool me once, fool me twice? Are these people going to go back? Or have they gone into roles like customer service, sales, customer success, right? Think about the skills your recruiters have. Relationship builders, they're salespeople. They're not selling your product, they're selling your company and your vision and the desire to work there. And I do think if I'm kind of giving my 2025 what we should be careful and watch for is this notion of if we go to hire this group of people again and we don't have that talent pool sitting and waiting, because that application number does not speak at all to the amount of people we're hearing about or seeing. If anybody's on LinkedIn, right? It's kind of the first thing you're seeing. A lot of recruiters, big presence, they're trying other things. And it's going to be interesting to see if we have to reskill them or convince them back in because we've hired them all, let them all go. Hired them all, let them all go, right? How many times will they put up with sort of that roller coaster wave? This is an interesting one, and I know you're all in the HR space, so you're probably going to get this right, but I bet if we took your CEOs and your CIOs and your CFOs and we asked this question, you might get very different answers. But the myth or fact question is that candidate experience matters less when your company is not hiring. See a lot of myths because you're all in HR and you know it's just as important, but anybody want to say what you think your CFO would say? We got a fast fact over here. This is a fact that I would show. Yes, you're all correct. It's a myth. But this is a fact that I would show your CFO if you're having this conversation. It's one of my favorite pieces of research that we've done. We surveyed thousands and thousands of people, and 51% of them said they would be less likely to be a consumer of your brand if they had a bad experience while applying or interviewing for a job with your company. There's some caveats I want to call out to this one. Look at that word interviewing. Applying. They might never have gotten to the interview stage. They just made it to your career site and your resume parser wasn't great, right? And what's really interesting, and I talk to so many companies, as I was saying, and sometimes I'll hear, we're a hospital. They'll say they're not going to tell the driver of the ambulance not to go to the hospital because they had a bad interview. I said, you are spot on correct, but you have a system of providers that do primary care, right? When they go to get treatment after they're hospitalized and they have to go pick a specialist, they may pick one in a different network. And think about it, you've not only taken the people, 51% of just general people in the public that don't want to spend money with your brand anymore, you've taken the people that liked your brand enough to want to be a part of it. And you're about to lose half of them potentially as consumers. I think this sort of joining we're seeing of consumerization and also employment, like a lot of companies saying, you know what, we don't have a brand marketing team and an employment marketing team anymore. We just have, it's one thing, right? Jobs at and the company, it's all the same. When they see you on TikTok for your corporate brand and when they see you on TikTok for your employment brand, it's all the same. They're not compartmentalizing that anymore. And here's where I think this gets really interesting. And I was speaking earlier to Gen Z driving changes that we all need to think about. That same number for Gen Z, remember, 2/3 of our applicants is 63%. So almost 2/3 of those younger applicants are actually saying, if I don't like the way I was treated, or maybe not treated, right? If I got the auto reject email, or worse, ghosting, then I'm going to spend my money with that thought in mind. I'm just curious, is anybody kind of having that conversation in our company of like, hey, I know, look, we may not be growing like crazy right now, but this is why. Don't forget, the data showed we have more applicants coming in. So that's great, but that also means we have more people not getting the job. We can't just think about the applicant who ends up the winner, right? We have to think the silver medalist. We also have to think about the people who really never were in the race, to be completely honest. Any companies thinking about that a lot? Going to think about it now? Bringing this back to their CFO? Right? It's an interesting thought, and I don't think we're talking about it quite enough. Couple more myth or facts for you. This is an interesting one. This is one that, depending on whether you watch like the news or LinkedIn or maybe talk to somebody you know that's 22 years old, I don't know, there's very different answers out here. But we asked candidates how long they thought the job application process should be. So that is from when they apply for the job till they get the job offer. How many think that most think less than 3 weeks? Fact. Yep, absolutely. It is speeding up. We know it's speeding up. Expectations are speeding up. Amazon Prime isn't even 2 days anymore, right? It's tomorrow, or if you spend $25, maybe by 4 p.m. today. That's just what we as a society are doing. The good news that we're seeing inside our system, though, is that our overall time to hire in our system is actually at 18 days. So from when the candidate applies till they're getting the job offer in our system is 18 days, which is matching about 70% of people that are saying they do expect it to be less than 3 weeks. Time to complete application right now on average inside our system is at 12 minutes. This is where I always say, if you want to write down a couple takeaways here, it's send that CFO that slide, go try to apply for a job on your career site. If you're sitting at 15, 20, you're not going to get the talent you need if you don't have enough talent. That being said, we are seeing companies come back now and say, you know what, I have too much. Maybe I want to slow it down a little bit, make sure I'm only getting the right candidates through that really want the job. We had those conversations in 2018 and 2019, and I think we're starting to see them happening again. This is a fun one. I told you they won't let me talk at all with a slide deck in the year 2024 without putting the word AI on one slide at least. But in HR, I know it's a polarizing topic. So just wanted to share a little bit of data with you, but first we'll do a myth or fact. Over half of HR leaders have already adopted AI in recruiting. A lot of facts, a couple myths. I feel like you're doing good. You should have kept score. It is a myth. Absolutely. This is one of my favorite things when we talk with customers. They say, whenever you bring up AI, they go, I know, we're really, really far behind. But the truth is they're not. Only about 29% of CHROs say they are already using AI in recruiting. So this notion, because it is so buzzworthy, it is what everybody's talking about at every conference, right? It's every article you're probably getting sent. The truth is it's coming. We know it's coming, but only 29% of CHROs are actually saying it's there today. About 40% say they plan to use it or implement it in the next 12 months. That leaves a pretty significant amount of CHROs that are saying, I know it's coming. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm being cautious. So if a lot of you feel like your company's behind in this movement in AI, the truth is they're really not. It's a lot of talk, and it is coming, and we need to prepare. We need to be ready. And we need to use it responsibly. But this notion that it's already here and you're behind, I would say, for the most part, not exactly happening. But for recruiters, so we talked about the executive level. What do you think? Most recruiters want more AI in the hiring process. Think about this being recruiters. Not. We got a lot of facts and one myth. It is a fact. So our research is actually showing that TA professionals are starting to leverage AI. So 30% are helping to use it to write job descriptions, 36% for matching skills to job openings, 36% for developing questions for an interview, and 40% going back to those silver medalists and saying, hey, take a former candidate that you had, find another job for them, or take a job you had and find people I really liked, but they just weren't a fit for that specific role. It is also interesting, though, because there is also a large segment of these recruiters that are fearful that AI will take their jobs. So we've got this sort of double-edged sword. They do want AI to make them more efficient. They don't want it to necessarily take over their role. Last one, and I'll open it up after this for a couple questions. I know I've got a couple minutes left. It is harder than ever right now to make a great hire. I see mostly facts and one myth. We think it's a fact. We pull up all these things, right? We're saying we have smaller recruiting teams. We're saying that we have higher expectations from candidates. We have more of those candidates. We're seeing reduced time to fill, right? All these things. but we're still seeing that candidate experience is more important than ever. And we're seeing also that if it isn't, we're seeing a bottom line to our businesses. So we think it is. And that's why this is the fun part of our job. We put this research out publicly. This is not, something that you have to be a customer necessarily of iCIMS to see. We do larger reports on a quarterly basis, but a lot of this data comes from our monthly reports that we put out every month. We put out summaries on LinkedIn. We are researching all kinds of topics. So if there's something you feel like you have a curiosity about, didn't get to hear today, reach out to one of us. We'll be brainstorming what goes in next month's report in a couple weeks here. But just wanted to share that this is all publicly available, icims.com/insights, or there are QR codes on your paddles also for some of the data that I shared today as well.
Thank you again for such an excellent session. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. Our next session will begin shortly, so please click the join button that will appear on your screen to be redirected, and we look forward to seeing you there.